Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. In this video, I will identify the best plays at the tight end position and defensive special teams position for Week 8 of the NFL. The tight end position has proved to be very elusive through the first 7 weeks, to say the least. The top projected tight ends seem to have the same names week in and week out. However, the top scoring tight end seems to vary from week to week. For example, let's take a look back at Week 7. The top projected tight ends in Week 7 were as follows: Kittle from San Francisco, Ingram from the Giants, Andrews from Baltimore, Hooper from Atlanta, and Waller from the Raiders. The actual top 5 scoring were Waller from the Raiders with 34.60 points, Ebron from Indianapolis with 17 points, Rudolph from Minnesota with 16.80 points, Jimmy Graham from the Packers with 16.50 points, and Hunter Henry from the Chargers with 15.70 points. Waller, who was the top scoring tight end with 34.60 points, was the only tight end that was projected in the top 5 and in the top 5 ownership, and he also ended up being the top scoring tight end. These top 5 scoring tight ends combined for a total of 28 targets and scored 100.60 fantasy points, and you can break that down further to 3.59 fantasy points per target. The top 5 also averaged 5.6 targets for 20.12 points, and that points is really inflated because of the 34.60 points that Waller scored. The best way to identify tight ends is to look at the tight ends that are targeted the most and factor in the matchups as well. The top targeted tight ends through the first 7 weeks are as follows. Ertz from Philadelphia has 60 targets. He's receiving 8.4 targets per game. Hooper from Atlanta has 55 targets. He was receiving 7.9 targets per game. Ingram from the Giants has 53 targets, which comes out to 8.8 targets per game. Waller from the Raiders has 50 targets. That comes out to 8.3 targets per game. And Kittle from San Francisco has 42 targets, which comes out to 7 targets per game. Now, the top targeted tight ends in the red zone, this is really important because touchdowns have so much variance from week to week. So if you can gain an edge, one way is to look at the running backs who are getting the touches in the red zone, wide receivers who are getting targets in the red zone, and tight ends who are getting targeted in the red zone. These tight ends are getting the most targets in the red zone through the first 7 weeks. Ertz from Philadelphia has 9 targets inside the red zone. One of them has been inside the 10. Hooper has 7 targets inside the red zone, 4 of those inside the 10. Everett from the Rams has 7 targets inside the red zone, 3 inside the 10. Hockenson, the rookie from Detroit, 7 targets inside the red zone, 4 of those were inside the 10. Ingram from the Giants has 6 targets inside the red zone, 4 of those being inside the 10. Waller from the Raiders has 6 targets inside the red zone, 1 of those was inside the 10. And Kittle from San Francisco has 6 targets inside the red zone, with 2 of those being inside the 10. In Week 8, these tight ends have the best matchups. Cook for the Saints has been ruled out, so the tight end for New Orleans this weekend will be Josh Hill, facing Arizona, who's ranked number 32 against the tight end, allowing the most fantasy points per game, 19.5 fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Next is Delaney Walker and Jonas Smith from Tennessee. They're facing Tampa Bay, who's ranked number 31 against the tight end. Tampa Bay's given up 14.7 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. And Walker actually has a questionable tag, so pay close attention to that. It might just be Jonas Smith. Number 3 is Hooper from Atlanta, facing Seattle. Seattle's ranked number 27 against the tight end. Seattle's giving up 12.3 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Number 4 is Fells and Atkins from Houston. They face Oakland this week. Oakland's giving up 27 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Oakland's ranked number 27. They're giving up 12.3 fantasy points per game to the tight end. And number 5 is Fant from Denver, the rookie, facing Indianapolis. They're also ranked number 27. and they're giving up 12.3 fantasy points per game to the tight end as well. So Seattle, Oakland, and Indianapolis are all tied at giving up 12.3 fantasy points per game to the tight end. And there's really only there's 7 points between the number 1 and number 5. Arizona giving up the most at 19.5, but between the number 4 or between the number 2 and the number 5, there's only 2 points that separate those tight ends. There's not a really big scoring average for the tight end position in the NFL this year. Now, when you look at the top matchups, you also have to consider the tight ends that have the least favorable matchups. And these tight ends in week 8 have the worst matchups. Ricky Seals-Jones from Cleveland. Cleveland's facing New England. New England's ranked number 1 against the tight end. They're allowing 3.8 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Ertz from Philadelphia. They're facing Buffalo this week. Buffalo's ranked number 2 against the tight end, and they're only giving up 4.6 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Greg Olsen from Carolina facing San Francisco, who's ranked number 3 against the tight end. San Francisco's giving up 4.7 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Hawkinson from Detroit is facing the Giants. The Giants are ranked number 4 against the tight end. They're giving up 6.4 fantasy points per game to the tight end. And Oliver from Jacksonville facing the Jets. The Jets are number 5 versus the tight end. They're giving up 6.9 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. I did notice that 2 of the top 5 scoring tight ends in week 7 were from the same game that ended up having a total score of 66 points. So obviously, I'm thinking you want to lean towards the tight ends that are in the higher projected or in the games that have the higher projected totals. And this weekend, for example, Seattle's tight end Wilson, that game totals 53.5 points. They're playing Atlanta. That tight end is Hooper. And again, that game totals 53.5 points. The Oakland and Houston tight ends, they're playing each other. That would be Waller versus Fells or Atkins. Pick your poison there. 1 week it's Fells, 1 week it's Atkins. But that game totals 51.5 points. And Detroit versus the Giants is another high total game. I believe that, it's 49 points. Those tight ends are Hawkinson and Ingram. Now, I never punt any position no matter what it is, tight end, defense, I'm not willing to punt any position. So I want to try to identify the best at each position with value in mind. These are the tight ends in week 8 that I'm going to be targeting, and I'm going to give you the reasons why. Hill from New Orleans. He's $3,200, which is really cheap, somewhat risky, but he doesn't need to score much to get value. They are facing Arizona, who's the worst team versus the tight end position, giving up 19.5 fantasy points per game to the tight end. I'm thinking it's going to be Bridgewater. I'm not sure why would they chance running Breeze out there in a game. I mean, anything can happen in any game, but an extra game isn't going to hurt Breeze. And Bridgewater's undefeated. So, and this could be, if Kamara's out, this could be a game where Bridgewater leans on the tight end. Next is Atlanta's Hooper. He's $5,500. For me, Ryan's injury really affects this decision for me. But there's another thought that with a backup quarterback, he might lean more on the tight end position or, to drop off to the running back or tight end. Hooper's averaging 7.9 targets per game. Seattle's number 27 versus the tight end. They're allowing 12.3 fantasy points per game. So everything sets up really nice. And if Matt Ryan's playing, I'm definitely going to have more shares of Hooper. If Schaub is filling in for Ryan, I'm not sure which way I'm going to go with that. I'm probably going to look at ownership. I mean, if people are really off of Hooper, I'll probably have more than the field with Hooper. He is priced up again this week at 5,500, but I still don't feel like his price is caught up to his production. Number 3 is Waller. He's 5,900. He's getting 8.3 targets per game. He's in the second highest total game on the board with 51.5 points. I'm concerned with ownership. Right, I've seen some things right now. It's hovering around 20%. I'm not real crazy about the price being right close to 6,000. But Houston's number 9 versus the tight end. So I'm gonna, I'll have some shares of Waller. If Williams is out, though, you can, and as this game's it has a really high projected score of 51.5 points. And if and Fuller's out for Houston. Williams could be out for the Raiders. Those targets are going to go somewhere, and Carr has been forcing a lot to Waller each week. As a matter of fact, the last couple weeks, now he's averaging 8.3 targets per game, and I mentioned Fuller. Fuller doesn't really have anything to do with Waller, other than part of a game stack. I mean, I'm really interested in the Watson Hopkins coming back with Waller. But I wanted to look at 8 targets in week 7, 5 in week 5, 8 in week 4. He had 14 in week 3, 6 and 7. So Carr definitely doesn't mind going to him, and some of his higher targeted games have been on the road. I definitely like him. Like I said, I'm not really crazy about the price, but he should be able to get value. Number 4 is Hunter Henry. He's $4,900. He's getting 7.3 targets per game. Chicago's number 22 against the tight end. They're giving up 10.7 fantasy points per game to the tight end, and Philip Rivers loves to go to this tight end. So I like his price, and he could be a nice pivot off of some of the higher owned tight ends this week. Next is Smith from Tennessee. He's $2,800. Delaney Walker is probably going to be out. He hasn't practiced this week. Tampa Bay's number 31 versus the tight end. They're giving up 14.7 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. The savings is really good, and he could get value fairly easy at $2,800 salary. So I like Jonah Smith. He could be real sneaky. He's the kind of player that you can plug in and put in some of the bigger GPP tournaments and use the savings to spend up in other places. And it's not a punt. He could get 4 to 5 times value easy. I also have interest in Fells and Atkins from Houston. It's hard to figure out which tight end is going to be getting the targets. It seems to alternate each week. But Oakland's number 27 against the tight end. They're giving up 12.3 fantasy points per game, and I like one of those two as part of a game stack. I definitely wouldn't use both of them in a lineup, but Atkins is actually cheaper, 2,800, and Fells is 3,400. So, I guess with the pricing, figuring that Fells is going to be the one getting all the targets. There's a lot of potential value at the tight end position in week 8. And summing it up, again, these are the tight ends that I'm going to be targeting. Hill from New Orleans, Hooper from Atlanta, Waller from Oakland, Henry from the Chargers, Jonnu Smith from Tennessee, and I'm on the fence as far as Fells and Atkins from Houston. Now I want to take a look at the defensive special teams position for week 8 of the NFL. As I mentioned, I'm not willing to punt any position, so I definitely try to get the best value. Some positions you do try to save a little to spend up and get other players, but I don't just scroll down to the bottom and take the least salaried team in any position in any position. So in this week, the actual least would be the Raiders at 1,500 versus Houston. This position is very difficult to project week in and week out. I've had some luck in the last few weeks getting the defense right, having one of the top 5 defenses in most of my lineups. I normally limit myself to 3 or 4 defenses, and I like to have a spin up, a mid range, and a lower range, depending on my lineup builds. Now, when I use an optimizer, I allow it to use more defenses, so I don't just but I don't put them all in there. I don't want the optimizer to go down to the bottom and get the $1,500 defense and put it in all my lineups so it can spend up in other places. But I do allow it to have more of a choice of defense and special teams to give me some more randomization in my lineups. Last week, number 4 was the Saints, and number 5 was the Chargers. The actual top 5 scoring were the Rams, who scored 21 points, Baltimore, who scored 18 points, Jacksonville, who scored 17 points, the 49ers, who scored 15 points, and Arizona, who scored 14 points. Now, the actual ownership was really interesting as well. The Bills led the way with 16.86%, and they were also the most expensive. 49ers were come in right behind the Bills at 16.39%. Then it dropped off to the Bears, who were 8.55%, and I was part of that percentage. I did not expect New Orleans to come in to Chicago and did what they did to the Bears, but I'm starting to think that the Bears defense, other than Khalil Mack, isn't really that much or that impressive this year. The Saints were under the Bears at 4.32%, and the Colts come in at 3.97%. Only the 49ers were projected in the top 5 in ownership and overall projected to be in the top 5. They were the only team that ended up in the top 5. I do like to focus on the home favorites for my defense special teams, and I also look at the line totals. I don't necessarily focus on the totals that are the lowest. Sometimes the ones with the highest are the ones that are the bigger point, have the bigger point spreads, are the defenses to focus on, because it's going to have a high total, and there's going to be they're projected to the line is really high. That means that the underdog is probably going to be behind, which means they're probably going to be putting the ball in the air, and that's where you get a lot of your defense special teams fantasy points. When you start passing a lot, you get, this sets up for the sacks fumble, the interceptions, returns for touchdowns. All that's possible when you're putting the ball in the air. Now, these are the defenses that I'm going to target in week 8, and I'm going to tell you the reasons why. My spend up option is going to be the Los Angeles Rams. They're $3,800, second most. I think the Patriots will probably get a lot of ownership. The Rams are going to be kind of my pivot off of the Patriots. They're a home favorite. Cincinnati only has a 17.5 implied total points scored. If Cincinnati gets behind and has to throw the ball against the Rams, now that they had Jalen Ramsey back there too, who made an instant impact last week, the interception return, this game could get real ugly for the Bengals. I think last week too that Dalton threw 2 or 3 interceptions right in a row. One went for a touchdown return, but this game could definitely get out of hand real quick for the Bengals, and I'd like the Rams as the spend up option for me this week, and they're $500 cheaper than the Patriots. The Patriots are going to be real popular because of what they've been doing defensively. My mid-range option is the Saints. They're only $300 less than Rams. They're at home. They're a home favorite. They're facing a rookie quarterback. The team that runs a lot of plays, and a lot of passing plays. And And as I mentioned, passing sets up the opportunity for all kinds of defensive special teams points. And third is Detroit. They're my spin down option at $2,800. They're a home favorite. I think they're going to be one of the lower owned defenses. They're also facing a rookie quarterback, and their defenses look pretty good, especially in passing games. With Slay back there, I don't think they're going to have much trouble with the Giants passing game. They're probably going to have some difficulties with Saquon Barkley, but I can see if this game gets up into balls a lot of scoring, which it actually has a 49 point game total. Starts getting into a game where Jones is putting the ball in the air, you could see the potential for some sacks and some fumbles or interceptions. As I mentioned, I generally like to limit my defensive special teams to three or four. This week I'm going to go with 3. And I already told you about what I do with the optimizer, and we'll be covering that tomorrow when we take all this information and build some manual lineups. I'm going to use the optimizer to show you what the optimizer did with the players from the player pool and put this all together. So summing it up again, the defense special teams that I'm going to be targeting in week 8 are the Rams, 3,800. My spend up option, my mid range option is going to be the Saints for 3,500, and my spend down option is going to be the Detroit Lions at $2,800. So I want to thank you guys for joining me. I encourage you to drop any comments or opinions below. Remember, tomorrow, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we're going to be putting all this research on from my videos this week. We're going to put it all together and build some winning lineups for Sunday. I would really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified when my next video does post. And I will be back tomorrow with so we can put this all together. My name is Ty Patton. This is all about winning daily fantasy sports, and I'll see you guys real soon.